me go ahead and get on the lights over here really quick. All right, so before we jump into things, I'm going to go ahead and ask, does anyone want to, just off the top of their head, define mandatory reporting? It's got to be one of the four of you. There's not a lot of you in the room right now, so you're on the spot. Anyone want to take a crack at it, defining mandatory reporting?
It's a legal obligation to report any like abuse or sexual in nature or verbal or emotional.
Wow. Well, Maddie, I think you could just go ahead and take the quiz and go on. I mean, that's
I'm mandated report.
Yeah, no, yeah, totally, actually. Yeah, exactly. So, well, there it is. I guess my job here is done. I mean, I still got to actually share this kind of stuff with all of you, but yeah, that's exactly it. So it is a legal obligation to swiftly report to authorities known or suspected cases of abuse or neglect of a minor. So once I get the TV going, the presentation thing going, is it going to be a front TV?
Apple TV's on. The TV's a problem.
No, I think this TV is actually just not on. The Apple TV has the light on, it's behaving. The TV is just kind of being a little slow on me. Please wait. I already did it. Okay.
That's like waiting for a toaster to work.
All right. While I am trying to get this, I want you all to go to a specific website. I want you to pull out your phones, type in your browser, crossroadsabc.com/inside. Because that's going to be a helpful resource for you to know about. And basically this training exists so that you can use a very specific resource on that website correctly. So let's see here. Is this the youth office one?
Yes.
Okay. So if you go to crossroadsabc.com/inside, you'll see a few different tabs, and there's a tab called mandatory reporting on that part of the website. And let's see here. So crossroadsabc.com/inside, it looks like this. There's a tab that says mandatory reporting, and in that there's this link called child abuse reporting. This takes you to a fillable PDF. I just updated that PDF this week so that it's a little bit more clear, a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more concise than the one that we already had. It asks for pretty much the same information, but this form is something that you need to know exists, and you need to know when and how to use it. That is our goal today, is for you to know that it exists, that you are obligated to use it in certain cases, and when and how. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so mandatory reporting. This is a really sad reality, that this is just part of family ministry. It is something that all of you need to know about as people who volunteer in youth ministry. It would also be necessary for you to know this stuff if you were with kids. Anything where you work with minors, where parents in some way entrust their children to you. This is stuff that you should probably know about. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to understand the obligations that clergy, and I'll get why that's in quotes, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's to understand the obligations you have with respect to mandatory reporting, so why it matters, who has to do this, and what you have to report, and then the process for documenting and reporting. Most of what our energy is going to focus on is understanding the details of what you've got to report. Especially there are some things around what constitutes unlawful sexual contact. There are little details that are very critical and important and helpful to know. So that's where a lot of our energy is going to be today. So the reason why we have mandatory reporting, there's two major reasons for mandatory reporting. Number one, it is a legal obligation. It is illegal not to report cases of reasonably suspected abuse or neglect, or known abuse or neglect. You can't not report it. So there is a legal obligation. This isn't just like, covering the church in the case of a lawsuit. It's not just that Danny McKenna and I have this obligation, you're helping us out. You have the obligation. And we do it because God calls us to care for children. God calls us to care for protecting the least of these. And because we serve and we worship a God who defends the fatherless and the widow, we have an obligation, a moral obligation as Christians, to be protecting the kids that are in our care. And we also have the legal obligation. All right. So the legal obligation, I threw into the PowerPoint where I could. I copied and pasted directly from the state statutes. So at some point in your life, you've actually seen the laws themselves. And as it turns out, I'm glad that I had to revise some of this week to prepare for this training, because some of the law has actually changed in a really important detail. Prior to the passing of HB 25-1188, which I think passed in August or something like that, prior to the passing of that bill, the timetable on when you're supposed to report was vague. That bill has now been updated. You have to report within 24 hours of finding out. Okay? So what the Colorado Revised Statutes, what they say is that, and there are legal exceptions. I don't think those are going to apply to us. You can, Google the Colorado Revised Statutes if you want to get into it. It's not fun, but it's there. If you have reasonable cause to know or suspect abuse or neglect, then you have to report it no later than 24 hours after receiving the information. Notice it says reasonable cause to know or suspect. You could be unsure. You are not a prosecuting lawyer trying to establish truthfulness beyond reasonable doubt. What you're trying to do is show that you know, is if you know or have reasonable cause to suspect. Which means that when it comes to mandatory reporting, you actually err on the side of saying something rather than saying nothing. There is a bigger legal liability if you know or suspect something and don't report than if you report and it really doesn't count. There are problems with people overusing their mandatory reporting obligations. Part of this bill that just passed was people recognizing that sometimes Child Protective Services can't get help to the people they need because there's an overflow of data. So they have, and they've adjusted the laws so that basically things that are the basis of profiling, or if someone, if they think someone's being profiled because of their social class or something like that, the people on the CPS end are trying to filter things out a little bit. But by and large, the bigger problem is if you know something or suspect something, then don't report. So it is illegal not to report suspected abuse or neglect. All right. Now, the question of who is required to report, and the law goes in and it lists a sub-paragraph A through Z, and then when you get to AA, where the last ones are clergy. So there's, in addition to clergy, there's 26 other categories. Maddie, you are at least one of those. And so if you're a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, a therapist, if you're in public service, there's a whole bunch of people who are mandatory reporters. Included in that list are clergy. Clergy is a almost intentionally rather vague and open-ended category. It can include a priest, rabbi, licensed minister. It could also include member of religious order, which, that can be pretty broad. And most important is a recognized leader of any religious body. What that means is that all of you count as clergy because there are students who are in your care. They see you as a recognized leader. Once someone considers you a religious or spiritual leader, you are legally considered clergy, and if they disclose something to you, or if you notice something that gives you reasonable cause to know or suspect abuse or neglect, you have an obligation to report. So, up to this point, are there any questions on the obligation for mandatory reporting? Okay. So, abuse or neglect comes with a variety of subcategories. There are 4 that you need to know. So when you're thinking, hey, what counts as abuse or neglect? The laws spell that out in pretty clear detail. Title 19 doesn't spell out unlawful sexual behavior, that's in like other parts of the legal code, but the 4 things that you need to know about when it comes to reportable abuse are physical, sexual, neglect, and emotional. All right? Physical abuse, evidence of skin bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, failure to thrive, burns, fracture of bones, subdural hematoma, soft tissue swelling, or death, and there's not a good explanation for it, or it might not have been accidental. So physical is like, there's a physical thing. It's very clearly spelled out. Sexual is anything when a child, so someone under 18, is subject to unlawful sexual behavior. We're going to go into that in more detail because there's details to be aware of. Neglect. So my boss, Angie, she oversaw family ministry for a number of years here, has, prior to me doing this, has been the owner of mandatory reporting training, so she's seen some stuff. 70% in her experience of cases of mandatory reporting are neglect. And so the way that is legally defined is that a child being in need of services because the parent fails to take actions to provide food, clothing, shelter, care, or supervision that a prudent parent would take. It's a parent or legal guardian not doing their job. Not doing like a reasonable thing. We're going to spell out in a little more detail what neglect could mean. Neglect could be a kid shows up in the winter and they're in flip-flops and a t-shirt and it's kind of raggedy, and it's not because the kid is just like the kid version of those like 19-year-olds in the Midwest who wear shorts in the winter just to show off. Like, I mean, sometimes that's the kid's personality, and you cannot get them to wear a coat because they're 4 and they think coats are evil, and that's just how, I mean, sometimes that's how it is. But if it's clear that the parent is just not doing what they're supposed to do, that's cause to suspect abuse. Or if there's food at a function and the kid is constantly ravenously hungry because they're not getting proper food at home. Another case of potential neglect is a kid is homeschooled, but no schooling of any kind is actually occurring. That is educational neglect. So things that a parent is just failing to do. If a kid is just, too young to be at home and is abandoned at home, that is not providing supervision. So that's cases of neglect. Most of what you're going to be obligated to report is going to be neglect. And then there's emotional abuse, which is defined as identifiable and substantial impairment of the kid's functioning. So because of what the parent is doing or the guardian is doing to the kid, there's something that the kid doesn't have access to as a result of their treatment by the parent or guardian. Right? So those are the 4 kinds of abuse that you need to be on the lookout for. Any questions on these kinds of abuse? Some of the questions I'll get to later, some of the detail things, but I just want to know if you have any questions now. Okay. All right, so this is the process for mandatory reporting. You notice something, that is, you observe something in a child, or you hear it, as in it gets disclosed to you by the child or a witness. You notice something, you clarify, and I just went all pastoral and alliterative and clarify with care and curiosity, but you basically do the Ted Lasso thing and approach with curiosity and not judgment to try to make sure that you have the facts as they have been represented to you as clearly as possible. Then you notify staff, so you notify McKenna or Damon. I'm going to end up knowing if you tell them, or you could tell me directly, either way. But you notify church staff and you document things.
I'm
in
gonna
certain
clarify, you
ways.
should definitely tell me.
Yes.
First, like that's.
Yes, that's
and
right.
then we'll all end up knowing, but I should
Yeah.
know.
Yes. Yeah, and so you should let your ministry area leader know, that's Damon and McKenna. And you need to document. That means go to crossroadsabc.com/inside, go to the child abuse reporting form, download a copy, and start typing in to fill it out. And then if you have reasonable suspicion, like if you've documented it and you looked at it and you might have heard something that makes you think like, oh, this isn't actually reportable. Like there's something in our archives where a kid showed up at one of our events, and this kid was distraught because the parent had struck the kid. And after further clarifying conversation, the ministry area leader was able to clarify that this was an extremely isolated incident. This was not a severe enough thing to count as physical abuse. And so the leader documented it and talked it through with the other parent and did not report that to Child Protective Services. So there may be scenarios where you pick up something odd and then recognize, actually, this doesn't reach the level of reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect. Yeah.
I know I'm taught that spanking is a reportable offense. Is that same here, or do you want us to document that?
So I would say, looking at the laws and how it defines physical abuse, I don't think spanking qualifies with what is described here.
Yeah.
And I think this particular case, it was like a spanking situation.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, because I know that
Yeah.
sometimes maybe you guys would rather it be documented and just in your system.
Mhm.
Or, yeah.
I mean, it's something where I think if you've had something that makes you think, wait, do I mandatory report? You document, even if you think you might have to do that. But it may be a situation where you document, but you don't actually go to the authorities with it.
Yeah.
There may be some cases like that. Or maybe you see something that looks like this, and then, because there's like skin bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, fail to thrive, and so forth. Legally, it's this physical problem and also not justifiably explained. It could be that you discover an injury on a child, you have what you think might be a justifiable explanation. That's why you don't report, but you still saw something weird. You would document. Okay.
Can you clarify what you mean by document? Like send it
Yes.
to us, then
Yes.
it's on their own?
That is a really great question. So by document, what I mean is you go to crossroadsabc.com/inside, you click the child abuse reporting form, you download a copy of that, you fill it out, you make sure Damon or McKenna has it, and then we'll all be notified about what's happened, and probably process through with them the question of whether to report. And so that way, if it's a situation where you're like, okay, I've noticed something weird, it doesn't really qualify as reasonable suspicion of abuse or neglect, I just noticed something weird. You've actually talked that through with another person, and we have it documented, and that builds a paper trail in case you notice something weird later on that you can actually do something about, and that might bring it to the point of reasonable suspicion. But yes, by document, I mean the form, and you share that with your ministry area leader.
And then that remains confidential?
That remains confidential. So the people who will, if you document, the people who will know, so like if you tell Damon, I will know,
Mhm.
and so will Angie.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it lives.
Okay.
And so, the family is not going to know. If there's like an allegation against one parent, the other parent isn't going to know.
Okay.
So yeah, it remains confidential.
And then when you report to CBS doesn't ever give your name out either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is this inside this /inside page,
Mhm.
but a public page, or how?
It is a
how
public
is that-
page, but you can't get to it without typing the address in your browser bar.
Sure.
And once you fill out the form, it's not public.
Yeah. So you
Only
download
the
a copy of the
blank form is
form,
Uh-huh.
fill it out, and then you send it to Damon McKenna.
So
It
can you
gets.
fill it out on the website, or can you print that out?
You need to download it and then fill it out.
And by send, you mean email?
Yes, meaning email. I mean, you could also if you printed a copy and hand wrote it and handed the printed copy, that would count. The easiest way is probably just typing and emailing, but something handwritten will count. Okay, any more clarification thus far on the and I'm about to go through all of this. We'll spend most of the time on the clarify piece, but that's what we're going to talk about. Any other questions on what this means? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this process. There's noticing, clarifying, notifying, and then reporting. All right, so how you might notice, you might observe mistreatment directly. This means like a parent is dropping off their kid and like roughhousing with their kid, berating them, and you see something really ugly like with your own 2 eyes. That is a way that you can become aware of something. Secondly, you might notice that a child comes in looking disheveled, they're hungry, they're bruised, and there's not a good explanation for it or something like that. So you might observe something going on with a child. The third, and this is in youth ministry, it's probably the most likely one you're going to get, is the minor just tells you something. Hey, in my household, this happened. And then you might also get disclosure from someone who knows the victim or witnessed abuse. So like, you know, the sibling might tell you, oh yeah, my dad did this to my brother, and that would also count as you becoming aware. All right? Any questions on what counts as noticing potential cause for suspected abuse or neglect? All right, and so if you hear something, your next step is to figure out which of these categories does it fall into. Does it count as physical, sexual, is it neglect, or is it emotional and psychological abuse? And I'm going to go over a little bit of details that help you clarify these things a little bit. Physical, we've already seen that law. It's bruising, it's injury that doesn't have a reasonable explanation and or is not accidental. We're going to talk a little bit more about sexual abuse and neglect. So what you do when you notice is you're trying to clarify which of these categories legally does it fall into, and to try to get the representation either in your own words of what you've seen or in the child's words of what the child's disclosing. So if you are noticing or hearing of the child abuse, then your goal is to calmly, attentively be an active listener. One thing that is really, really important with this is that you not feed language to the child. Because if you're feeding language to the child, if you're asking leading questions, if you're giving input to the situation that is then shaping the way the child tells you things, then what you report is then less useful. It becomes suspect because what happens is that is your interpretation of events, that's not what you observed, that's not what you heard. So, if a child is distraught, you're like, oh yeah, like half an hour before coming to church, my dad spanked me, and you're saying like, okay, so when your dad abused you, was it, and like, that would be a really cartoonish example, that would be asking a leading question. Then you were importing your language into the situation. That's not actually appropriate. And so, when the child comes through with this, be like, okay, so you're saying that your dad spanked you. Like, what does that mean? Like, can you physically tell me what occurred? Was this once? Was this more than once? Is this a thing that happens a lot, or is it really unusual? You can ask questions to clarify exactly what it is that they're telling you. And your job is to be attentive, is to be caring, and just to get as much clarity as possible on the exact facts as they have been represented to you. All right, so physical abuse is reportable when there's no reasonable explanation for it. And so the way it's defined in the law is these like physical things that are ailing the child, all right? Normally, mandatory reporting relates to neglect. So when something has been disclosed to you that might activate your mandatory reporting obligations, it's usually going to be a neglect thing. So the questions that you want to ask are related to the areas of care and supervision that a parent is meant to give a kid. If a child is exposed to substance abuse, that's neglect. If they're being left alone before they're old enough for that, that's neglect. If a child is not going to school or they're being homeschooled, but homeschool means there's nothing actually happening. Inadequate care, nutrition, something like that. And you know, the reality is that the way these things can work out, like clarifying, having this information, what you're trying to do is your goal is to help the child and if possible also help the family. So here is a scenario that that happened before. Is you have a kid, and in Angie's experience, you've seen this exact scenario play out with two very different results. Which is a kid showing up to church in winter, maybe not smelling great, underclothed, like not having winter coats, open-toed shoes, ravenously hungry. In some cases, that is just the personality of the kid. Like, you could have like toddlers who refuse to put on coats and wear anything but their favorite Crocs even in the winter. That's a thing that happens sometimes. But there was a scenario of a family presenting with problems, and the exact same scenario presented itself with a kid being ravenously hungry and underclothed and just generally disheveled. One of the scenarios that actually directed the family towards the church's benevolence resources, and generosity is a core value of Crossroads Church. So if it's something where we want to be able to help the family, we want to do that. There was a family where the dad had just been fired and they were living out of a minivan for a time, and disheveled was the best they could do. Similar story, kid presenting equally disheveled. It's because the parents were cooking meth in the house. Those are two very different scenarios, and how you respond as a mandatory reporter is going to be very different with those. That's why you ask clarifying questions. You try to figure out, what is the food situation, what is the clothing situation, what is the shelter situation, what are the parents trying to do, and the big difference between the living out of a van situation from one family and parents were cooking meth situation is the family that needed support responded positively towards questions and offers that led towards the family getting support. They were happy about the idea of the church doing some benevolence for that family. The family that was cooking meth, they were thinking stay away as far as possible. And so, but you can discover those kinds of things by asking clarifying questions and just trying to get from the child and from your observations the clearest picture of the most basic facts that you can. And by basic, I mean just uninterpreted, not filtered, just what you've heard and the way the kid is self-representing what's going on. All right, so before we get into unlawful sexual contact, because there are some little details there that are, I guess I shouldn't say little details. What I mean is there are very specific details to be aware of. Before we get into that, do you have any questions about clarification on physical abuse or neglect, or what your goal is to do in asking clarifying questions? Okay. So your goal is just to advocate for the child, get the most clarity you can on the facts. All right? So, unlawful sexual contact. This is something that can happen, and probably the most heartbreaking thing. About 11 years ago, I was actually on a jury in a sexual assault case where the perpetrator was charged with sexual assault from an adult in a position of trust. It was 7 counts. 5 of the 7 counts were also an additional count of sexual assault on a child. And I believe the perpetrator has 45 years left in their sentence. These things are really serious, and the justice system is capable of handling these situations, but it took a lot of work for the police to be able to prosecute the situation. And so it's important for you all to know what counts as unlawful sexual contact. So, non-consensual, woo! Yikes. Non-consensual or unwanted touching or grabbing and an intimate part for sexual gratification, that is unlawful sexual contact. The laws spell out in more detail a litany of things that count. I'm not going to run you through those. I think this covers it well enough. If the child is under 18 and the contact is non-consensual, it's mandatory reporting. However, there are situations of consensual sexual contact that count as unlawful sexual behavior. So I'm going to go with those. And there's basically two kinds of unlawful sexual contact with a minor. Number one is unlawful sexual contact with someone who is sufficiently older than the minor. And two is sexual contact from a person in a position of trust. So if a minor has even consensual sexual contact with someone who is sufficiently older or is in a position of trust, that's a mandatory reporting situation. So, what counts as too much older? If the child is 14 or under and they have consensual sexual contact with someone who is 4 years older than them or more, that is a mandatory reporting situation. So if a 13-and-a-half-year-old has an 18-year-old boyfriend and they're doing things, and it is the 13-and-a-half-year-old's idea, that is still unlawful sexual contact and is a mandatory reporting situation. If it's a 12 and a 16-and-a-half-year-old, even if it's consensual, that is a mandatory reporting situation. Or, if the child is 15 to 17 and their partner is more than 10 years older. So it's a 16 and a 27-year-old, 17-year-old and a 28-year-old. And even if it's the 17-year-old's idea, that counts as unlawful sexual contact. That activates your mandatory reporting obligations. So all of these are unlawful. 14 and 18 and a half, 13 and 17 and a half, a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old. Or a 15 and 26-year-old, 17 and a 27 and a half-year-old. All of these count. So even if consensual, if there's a 4-year gap and the kid is not yet 15, that's unlawful sexual contact. And if there's a 10-year age gap and the kid is 15 to 17, that is unlawful sexual contact. Yes?
This gets sticky. I didn't look on this deeply into it.
Uh-huh.
But, like, say I have a girl, this isn't happening yet.
Yeah.
Say I have a girl saying that they have, like, a consensual online relationship with somebody. Is this something that we should be reporting? Because it's not physical in nature. Maybe they allude to the fact that they're corresponding. And maybe
that is a fantastic question. I know where to look in the laws, and I can look at that. From what I recall, when the laws talk about unlawful sexual contact, it is physical in nature. There may be a subclause that pertains to digital stuff.
Yeah.
There may be a difference between chatting and sexting.
Right, and that, but like also,
Yeah.
that takes a lot of pride, I think.
Yeah.
And trust. On
Yes.
part, so.
Yes. So that's something where I need to take another look at it, and I think I'll get to that later today and probably update this PowerPoint, because that's actually that is a very real scenario.
Yeah.
And a fantastic clarifying question. It's one that I don't know the answer to, but I want to make sure that I do. Any other questions? I'm gonna like take that down in my notes app because this is,
You're welcome, that I could provide.
yeah, no, this is,
I
yeah.
love the 27.5-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, legally that counts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's clear,
Um,
very precise, objective language, good job, John.
yep.
It's my favorite thing, objective, clear, concise.
Good, good. It is one of my favorite things too.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that I guess in a strange way was in preparing to do this and kind of like carry as the family pastor our mandatory reporting training, I spent some time in the statutes that our state has, and it's one of those things where it provides a sense of relief to see the care and the detail that lawmakers have actually put in to protect the people that they represent. And it's one of those things that you know, you hear about in the news, all of the exceptions, all the ways where our political leaders are messing things up, because that's what makes good news. Most of good news, as in good for the reporting companies, like gets lots of views and clicks. But a lot of the work really is just people trying to protect their citizens, and seeing the clarity and the thought that went into this is one of those things where it's like, okay, it's nice to have your faith in an element of society actually boosted, and seeing the care that went into these laws is one of those things. All right. Additional, so that we talked about consensual sexual contact between someone under 18 and someone sufficiently older. Even if it's consensual, that is unlawful. The other one is between someone under 18 and a person in a position of trust. The case that I ended up on the jury on, the perpetrator was the partner of the parent, who then had some events with the child. Because the perpetrator was the partner of the parent, that perpetrator was in a position of trust as like a step parent, or, you know, they weren't married yet, but like a step parent in a way. So a person in a position of trust is a person, not adult, by the way, we'll get into that, but a person who is a parent or acting in the place of a parent and charged with the parent's rights, duties, or responsibilities. So a guardian or someone responsible for the general supervision of a child's welfare, or responsible for health, education, welfare, or supervision. When you dismiss to small groups, and the small groups are in your care, you are in a position of trust. You are the supervisor, you are responsible for their general welfare. So, if you do something unlawful, or someone in such a position of trust does something unlawful, then it has the additional legal label of coming from a person in a position of trust. Within Crossroads, all of these people are in positions of trust. So, student ministry staff, that is Damon and McKenna, in a position of trust. Pastors, that's me, I'm in a position of trust. Teenagers who help in children's and youth ministry, in a position of trust. So like the 6th and 7th graders who help out with Denise with elementary school, they are considered persons in a position of trust. Student leadership can count as a person in a position of trust. And what that means is, if someone in student leadership is dating a fellow student, things could actually, like there could be some liabilities with that, potentially. Children's ministry leaders, small group leaders, or if someone considers you a leader at Crossroads, you count as a person in a position of trust. So sexual contact coming from a person in a position of trust is considered unlawful. Any clarification, any questions you have? So if there is sexual contact coming from someone in any of these categories, that is a mandatory reporting situation. Okay. Now, there's another eventuality, which is you may learn from someone who is currently over 18 about abuse or neglect that occurred prior to them turning 18. And in that case, the law has some stipulations about when your mandatory reporting obligations are active. So there are two ways that you could still have to mandatory report, even if you learn something from someone currently over the age of 18. The first is that if the perpetrator is in a position of trust, like we just talked about, currently, of someone 18 or under, then you do have to mandatory report. So, if you learn from a high school senior over the age of 18 that one of their teachers did something that counts as unlawful sexual contact, and that person is still teaching minors, mandatory report. Or let's say that you believe that the perpetrator has subjected any child currently under 18. So an 18-year-old or older person tells you, oh yeah, my parents did this to me and my little sister. The little sister's still under 18. Whether or not you suspect that it's still going on, if the perpetrator is still caring for someone 18 or under, it continues to be a mandatory reporting situation. So these are some case scenarios where abuse is reportable when the person is 18 or older. All right, number one is the adult reports abuse as a child and the 12-year-old brother is still living with the father. That counts as reportable abuse. The adult reports abuse as a child by a grandfather, and the 15-year-old cousin visits with the grandfather. And the one that I talked about earlier, the school teacher is still teaching, and the person reporting the abuse is now over 18. That still continues your mandatory reporting obligations. Okay. All right. Any clarifying questions on what to do when you hear something from someone over 18? So I'm missing a phone number on this. Another thing that you may hear, this actually is not counted in your mandatory reporting obligations, but it is helpful to know. You may be disclosed something about a student having suicidal thoughts. That may be disclosed to you. It is not explicitly covered in mandatory reporting that you have to report suicidality. One of the things that goes along with that category that you have as clergy people is something that is a little bit like the structure of, if someone confesses to the priest in a confession box, like that sort of Catholic image where the priest gives total confidentiality to the person. Largely, if you know of, if a student discloses to you something criminal, then you as a clergy person are protected from having to be a witness to that, unless it pertains to intention to harm self or others or activates your mandatory reporting obligations. So if your middle school small group is like, hey guys, so we all robbed a bank yesterday, since you're clergy, their defense, if it went to trial, would probably block you from having to be considered a witness to that. That's a weird scenario, but that's part of your clergy legal status. But when it comes to suicidality, that is in a place of there's intention to harm self. And so that is something where you should intervene And so if someone discloses to you suicidal thoughts, you need to know two things. What is the plan, and do they have the means to carry out the plan? Because when it comes to intentions to do suicide, if there's a plan, the level of seriousness is just way higher than if they're contemplating, considering, or sharing something. Whatever the case, you should Google like local suicide hotline, like Colorado Suicide Hotline, just whatever phone number you can find that's active, give that to them, like give them the resource. If they disclose to you any kind of suicidal thinking. But if they have a plan and they have what it takes to carry out that plan, you ask like, okay, so you're thinking you don't want to be around anymore. Have you thought through what it might look like to do that? And the kid says, oh yeah, I found my mom's sleeping pills and I think, I don't know, I might just like take a whole bunch of them. They have a plan and the means to carry it out. That means you call the local police department, they'll do a welfare check, and you need to escalate it to that level. If there's a plan and the means to carry out that plan, it's elevated to the point of emergency. And then you should probably also tell Damon and or McKenna. All right. So if these questions are answered, you got to reach out to the police. If it's a scenario where a student is like, oh, yeah, my friend was saying suicidal things, and you're unsure what the friend said, and you don't know if there's a plan, you don't know if they have what it takes to carry it out, or if someone in the small group discloses, oh, somebody else in my small group had the plan, you talk to them and they deny, like, oh, no, I wasn't doing that, I was exaggerating, you don't go to the police with that. But if there's a plan, means to do it, that's when you escalate it to an emergency. Any questions on suicide? Okay, so we got through the detail clarifying. We're mostly done now. This is just getting into the details of what you do. Okay? The policy is that any revelation of child abuse, you have to report it immediately to the supervisor, pastor who oversees that area of ministry. That's this one. She also counts. Both should probably know. And you report that immediately. Like, small group time is over, immediately you go find Damon. Okay? So you have to report it right away. And so this is what the process looks like. So, you immediately report it to like whoever your leader is. So that would be Damon or McKenna. They'll make sure I know. And you'll have Damon or McKenna walk through the documenting and reporting process with you. And so the great thing about the structure that we have for you as volunteers to report, it is your name that goes on the reporting paperwork, but you have someone else to talk to about, hey, do I actually have to report this? Because all of these things probably, when they really happen, they present with some weirdness, with some gray area. Everything that you do, you're more than likely going to feel there's some kind of asterisk on the action you're taking. Like, yeah, I think I need to report this to Child Protective Services. In all likelihood, you might feel a little bit of uncertainty as to whether that's the right move. Because, as much as the laws try to make the situation clear, cut, and dry, reality is always more gray than our laws are able to describe. Yes?
I will say something that's called CPS more than a handful of times. They screen whatever you're reporting immediately. So don't feel bad about calling rather than not calling, because they will determine whether or not they're able to open a case or not.
Yeah. So all of these kind of scary legal clarification decisions you have to make in the moment, especially because the way these things happen, I mean, if something happens tomorrow night, this is going to be fresh in your mind, and you're going to be equipped for it. If something happens 6 months from now, which isn't any less likely, the details, you might not remember them as sharply. The great thing is that you don't have to navigate all of this alone. All right? So you'll walk through it with your ministry leader. And then also just, once again, there's no expectation of confidentiality, because I mean, you want your small groups to be safe spaces. When it comes to abuse, no expectation of confidentiality. And then in terms of notification, in general, you are not supposed to, like, nobody outside of the leadership of the organization is supposed to know that you've notified. So if there's been a mandatory reporting against a parent, just in case this needs to be said, you don't tell the parent that you've reported them. Just don't do that. And so really, you should tell Damon McKenna. Angie and I will know about that because of what our roles are in the organization. Like, we'll see the paperwork. But really, outside of that leadership network, you don't tell other small group leaders. Don't tell other people in the church. You just keep it there. So you may tell the child, hey, I think I need to report this to the authorities. That is a scenario that may happen, and I believe I have a field on the form where if you've told anybody, like, other than your ministry area leader, like who you've told, including like if you've told the child. So if there is immediate danger to them, like if the child discloses like their parent is having a mental health episode and might be a physical danger to their child because of that, then you might say, hey, I'm going to report this, and I don't know if I'm comfortable with you going home to this parent or something like that. Like, you could say that. And the other cases is like, you might have a child disclose something, and the child is aware enough, like there's a history with their parent. They're aware of what counts as neglect. They're very clear that what their parent has done is neglect, and they're telling you because some element of neglect that in an ideal world would have stopped has continued. If you say, hey, I'm reporting this, then what you're doing is just saying, like, I know why you're telling me, I see what you're trying to do, and I actually have the obligation to respond to this, and I'm going to. In that scenario, what you're doing is you're representing to the child that you care about them, that you are for them. That is not every scenario. It is not every scenario that the child is looking to you and expecting that you're going to report, but it is also the case that, especially with neglect, it's rarely a one-time isolated situation. It's part of a pattern of behavior. And so it can actually build trust between you and the minor if you let them know that you're going to report. All right, this is what the form looks like. You fill out this form. So if you go to crossroadsabc.com/inside, I think I've already shown that to you. It looks like this. And mandatory reporting. There's this dead, unavailable video. I'm gonna have to replace that. I've still got more website updates to get to, but I did the most important one, which is making sure our form is a little more up to date. What you should do is you should just go ahead and download it, then fill in the information, and make sure that it gets to Damon McKenna, and then Angie and I will see that information. If Damon or McKenna are really unsure about whether to report, they might ask me, to weigh in on whether this is a reportable situation or not. But that's what this form exists for you to do. So you go to crossroadsabc.com/inside. This is publicly, anybody can get to this website, but the only way you can get to it is by typing crossroadsabc.com/inside into your web browser. So if you're on like our Crossroads main site, like none of the links, there's nothing that you can click that'll take you to that. So you have to type in /inside. Because I work here, like my link to the main website is the link to inside, because I'm usually gonna need the inside things.
I also just sent it in the Ruby and it's pinned, so if you ever need it, just you can also go there.
Thank you. All right. So that's the notification, and then the last step is reporting, and it's just, this is the one slide on it, the actual act of reporting. And what you need to do is you need to discern what level of emergency is the situation. Most of the time, you're going to call CPS. There's a case of imminent danger to the child, you contact the police department, and if it is an active emergency, you call 911. All right? So, this is the main option, is calling Child Protective Services. This hotline, 844-CO-4-KIDS, is a statewide hotline. I believe Adams County has their own. If you go to our form, there's a checkbox about which number you've called. So Adams County has their own CPS line, but for most counties, they lean on the statewide hotline. And so Child Protective Services, they have a lot of things to do due diligence on their end. They're trained to make sure that they don't get information overload. And generally what happens is when you call Child Protective Services, the information that you give, if it's deemed appropriate, is it will get added to a file and it will be a point in a constellation. So Child Protective Services from a single mandatory report might not intervene. However, let's say that they have heard about neglect from you, from the kid's teacher, and say from an urgent care nurse, and it's all saying the same thing, then Child Protective Services would intervene, do a welfare check, and try to use the state's social safety net to get the parent into a position of being able to do what needs to be done on behalf of the child. That's what Child Protective Services will do. So if you activate your mandatory reporting obligations, you make a report, you call CPS, you are not going to be solely responsible for a social services agent showing up at the parent's door. You're not going to be solely responsible for that. You're going to be a contributor to that process. And the reporting that you do is in the hands of people whose entire job is training and discernment to know when it is and is not appropriate to make that intervention. So the pressure is not on you to know the whole chain of steps going forward, but to figure out just to report, which means err on the side of reporting. Now the police, if you call the police department, like the kid lives in Broomfield, call Broomfield Police, or wherever they live, call the local police department. The police will do a welfare check, and you do this for a case of imminent danger to the child. The child has disclosed to you, an extreme case would be the parent's cooking meth in the house, or maybe that there's substance abuse, that there are controlled substances that are accessible and being misused in the home. The police will very promptly check up on the home, and if the police see something, they will intervene. And what this means is the minor could disclose something to you. The parent could be sly enough to, they have controlled substances and they can, hide it effectively, and the police don't see anything, then that's actually not going to get closer to justice in the situation, unfortunately. But if you believe that the safety of the child is threatened by the actions of the parent, there's imminent danger, you call the police. So that would be like drugs in the home, that would be mental health episodes or something like that, resulting in violence on the child. Yes.
The big one I report is adults or people in care, especially single parents, that drink in excess
Yeah.
in the home, or pick up the
Yeah.
child
Yeah.
while drinking, and if the child tells you or you smell alcohol on the child, it's usually
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And then an active emergency, when you would call 911 is you have to have a reason to believe that something is presently happening. And it's difficult to imagine a scenario where that would be your obligation, because something would have to be currently happening right now. There is
Like you're watching it?
Huh?
Like you're watching it?
Yeah, or the child tells you there's active meth cooking happening, or
Kidnapping by.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, if there's or you've seen you've physically seen like the parent abusing their child at drop-off, which, I mean,
It's a
you know,
strange thing to do, the church parking lot.
which is usually, I mean, the sad truth is that abusers are usually self-aware enough and sly enough to not make it that visible, which is why the active emergency situation is pretty unlikely. But anyway, that's how it goes. Okay, any more clarifying questions on mandatory reporting?
I had one that popped up, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, go ahead.
In the case of like grooming,
Mhm.
so like say you have a child say that they're like actively talking to a person in trust via text message, but nothing like is happening.
Mhm.
I think same thing with the online dating, I guess, is like, but like now it's different because it is a person in trust, and you see text messages of like this person saying like, oh, you're cute, you know, like this is grooming each other,
Yeah.
like, or saying like, when you turn 18, we're definitely gonna be together, like things
Yeah.
like that. I've never done like that side of reporting.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think your main, probably the most effective thing you would do is to
Obviously
tell the yes, and to tell the kid like, hey, this is what grooming is.
Yeah.
I would say you still report.
Okay.
It would be a call Child Protective Services kind of thing, and that would you know the laws intentionally. Let's see here. Let me go back to the main mandatory reporting law. That does count as reasonable cause to suspect
Okay, cool.
if you've seen grooming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're just actively like, hey, I'm talking to this person, and like,
Yeah.
what's the nature of this conversation? Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Like when you say talking, what do you mean? Okay, cool. I just wanted to like make that clear, I guess, because I know that we give out our phone numbers sometimes. Not that any of you in this room would do that, but.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I have like a Google form quiz I'll be sending out later, just to make sure we're clear on this. And the reason why I made a quiz is because like 4 of you are here, but a lot more people need to know this. Everybody needs to know this, and I don't know, I think a quiz is more enforceable than